The Lydian mode has a floaty, dreamlike brightness that is elevated beyond the standard major scale. This particular sound isn't used a lot in pop or rock, but will be recognisable from the huge amount of film scores and soundtracks that use it. If you want to write a Lydian mode melody, then you need to understand the notes that go into the Lydian mode. The major scale is an excellent point of comparison for all other scales and modes. If I label the major scale, also known as the Ionian mode, with the scale degrees 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 and 7, then the Lydian mode would have the scale degrees 1, 2, 3, sharp 4, 5, 6 and 7. When writing Lydian mode melodies, you want to try and highlight the notes that create a uniquely Lydian sound. In this case, it is very obvious which note this is. The only note of difference with the major scale is the sharp 4. Let's look at an example now to explore the mode further. C Lydian has the notes C, D, E, F sharp, G, A and B. You saw that the sharp 4 note is critical for the Lydian sound. The third note is also important because it indicates that this is a major sounding scale. Here's a very simple melody that highlights the third and sharp 4th notes, E and F sharp. You want to focus on these notes to bring out the Lydian flavour, but what else can you do to achieve this? If you play notes on a strong beat, then they are felt more and stand out. In a 4/4 time signature, with 4 beats in a bar, this would be beats 1 and 3, with the first beat being the strongest. Listen to the following example. In bars 1 and 2, the 3 and sharp 4 notes, E and F sharp, are on weak beats. In the second half, they fall on strong beats 1 and 3. Lydian is an interesting mode that can cause a few problems for songwriters. This is because it is harmonically unstable. Every mode has a major scale with the same notes. For example, C Lydian has the notes C, D, E, F sharp, G, A and B. And G major / Ionian has the notes G, A, B, C, D, E and F sharp. It's unstable because the raised 4th and the tonic or first note of the scale create a tritone. Tritones are a series of 3 whole note intervals that are found in diatonic scales. Tritones create tension that wants to resolve to the next stable interval. In a typical major scale, the tritone is between the 4th and 7th scale degrees. This tritone resolves perfectly to the major scale's 1st and 5th scale degrees, the 2 most stable notes of the scale. However, because Lydian's tonic note is part of the tritone, the only resolution you get is when the 4th scale degree moves up to the 5th scale degree. Here's the tritone notes in C Lydian, C and F sharp, followed by the 5th note G. This creates a partially resolute sound, creating an open, floating sense of mystery that never entirely feels resolved. You may have noticed in the first 2 examples I avoided this 5th note. Let's look at a melody in C Lydian with this note involved. Listen to how it draws the ear towards it. The last example showed you how important the tonal centre of Lydian melodies is. It can easily begin to feel like you are in the major scale with the 5th note as its first note. This is because it provides strong resolution and a feeling of being the home or tonic. Always be mindful of this note if you are trying to create a distinctly Lydian melody. If in doubt, you can avoid it entirely. When creating melodies, it is also important to consider the shape of the pattern. Melodies can move downwards or upwards, in small steps or big leaps. Balancing the movement or shape of the melody is another important part of creating and maintaining interest. Look out for the leaps and steps in this Lydian example. Melodies don't live in isolation. They have a strong relationship with harmony, or in other words, chord progressions. Let's now look at how this relationship works. A melody can be written from 2 broad approaches. You can write the melody first, and then fit chords to the melody, or you can write the chords first, and then the melody. The second approach is the most common, probably because it is easy to strum chords on a guitar, or play them on a piano, and then sing along. If you look at a lot of popular songs, you'll see how the chords directly influence the melody with the choice of notes. If you have an existing Lydian key chord progression, you can start with this and create a melody for it. The easiest way to build a melody from chords is just to use chord notes. Each chord will be constructed with several notes, and whilst that chord is playing, we can use these notes to create a melody. For example, a basic Lydian chord progression alternates from 1 to 2. In a key of C Lydian, these chords would be C major and D major. C major has the notes C, E and G, whilst D major has the notes D, F sharp and A. In the next example, I'll construct a melody using only these chord tones whilst the chords play. Pay particular attention to how the notes E, F sharp and G sound here. Now I'll use the same chord progression, but instead of the chord notes, I'll use the other 4 notes from the C Lydian mode for our melody. The chord note melody feels really safe, and if you place these notes on the strong beats in a bar, it feels even safer. Notes from outside of the chord sound tenser and unsettled. The level of tension depends on several factors. If it's in the scale of the key, then it will have some tension, with different levels within this. And then if you want greater tension, you can reach out for chromatic or alien notes. Writing a melody is a balancing act, building up tension and then resolving it by selecting these different notes. Something you may have seen in songs is the use of borrowed chords. This is where chords from a parallel key are used in the current key. A parallel key has the same root or tonic note, so with our examples in the key of C Lydian, we could borrow from C major, C minor, C mixer Lydian, etc. This introduces chromatic notes to the song that are outside of the existing key. These tense alien notes can be very noticeable in your melodies. But as discussed earlier, if we use chord notes, then they feel safer. Look at the following example with the chords 1, 2, minor 2, 2. The minor 2 chord, which is D minor here, has been borrowed from the parallel major key C major. It has one note different from the D major chord. This is the flat third note, which is F. I will play this outside note over the chord. I'll also repeat the melodic phrase from the previous bar that is heard over the major 2 chord. Changing a single note in a repeated phrase like this can really draw the ear to the change, creating something that feels the same but is different. This has been an example of modal mixture or modal interchange. These are just other terms for describing what I have done, mixing chords and notes from parallel modes/scales. Of course, you don't have to use the chromatic notes over the borrowed chord if you don't want to, but be mindful that you may create tension. Use your chord tones to create safety and see how it sounds. In the next example, I shift down the second part of the phrase over the minor 2 chord without using chromatic notes. Also listen to how I hold the A note across the chord change from bar 3 to 4. Both of these chords have an A note, so this creates a pleasing sound. In another video on the channel, I created the chords for a song in the key of C Lydian. This will be linked at the end of this video. I've written a melody for it, using some of the techniques and ideas discussed earlier. The melody starts in the verse, over a borrowed D minor chord. This chord introduces an F note, which I played to highlight the minor sound, much like I did in an example earlier on. This provides a nice step down to the E note, which is part of the next A minor chord. Then there is another step from E to D over the G chord. The verse avoids the one chord C major entirely, focusing the ear towards the G major chord. As such, I used the G note in the melody to provide that resolution I talked about earlier. This makes this part of the song feel settled in the G major key. You'll see when you get to the chorus that the song will take a more Lydian turn. Some notes are held over chord changes to provide an interesting sound. The first 4-bar verse section ends with an F note to complement the underlying dominant 7th chord. I broadly repeat the melody again for the next 4 bars. The target notes remain the same, but there's a bit of variation into the higher registers in the first 2 bars, with the introduction of the G note to further emphasise the G major feel. This time I end on the F sharp note, which is part of the changed G major 7th chord. This will later lead into the much more Lydian chorus. The verse repeats again with the intro before the chorus comes in. The melody becomes much more Lydian focused in the chorus, as do the chords. You can see the notes begin to focus heavily on F sharp and E, the sharp 4 and 3rd notes that have featured throughout this video. Listen to how there is a shift in feel and sound here. A rising nature in the chord progression is matched by a rising melody up to the B note. The first 4 bars also exclusively feature chord notes, cementing the feeling of home and safety. The second 4 bars follow similar rhythmic patterns and use more chord tones. Some octave leaps feature over the A minor 6 chord to provide a bit of drama, but as they are the chord root note, it isn't too unsettling. Also note that no fifth note G features anywhere in the chorus, even over the G major 7th chord. This is to maintain the Lydian focus. The first 4 bars then repeat again, where a new motif is introduced over the C add sharp 11 and D chord. This provides a nice descending pattern towards the F sharp note again, and the same melody as earlier over the E sus2 and E minor add 9 chords. The chorus ends with an extra 2 bars of C and D. The melody here changes gears, moving quickly between chord notes and non-chord notes to build towards the E note that features in the outro's first chord. Follow along, listen to the melody, and then have a go at writing your own Lydian melody. You've learnt about melodies, but there's a wide world of the Lydian mode out there. I've made a playlist just for you right here, so make sure you watch that next and improve your Lydian knowledge today.